Welcome to Codesigned's Automating Business Processes with Nintex Workflow webinar. My name is Eric Rhodes and I'll be your presenter. So our agenda for the webinar. First of all, we'll talk about Codesigned and about myself. Then we'll jump right into Nintex Workflow and the features of the application. Then we'll talk about Nintex Live, followed by a demo, and then we'll do some wrap up for the webinar. So a little bit more about Codesigned. We are a SharePoint exclusive shop located in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Our focus is on SharePoint user experience, hosting, and process improvement, which involves Nintex. You can find us on the web. Also, we're very active on social media, including LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So there are our addresses. So please be sure and go to those and find out more about our company. We are also a Nintex partner. This slide shows all the different services that we perform related to Nintex, including the planning and strategy, as well as business process design. We also focus on architecture, forms design. We can also install, configure, integrate, and actually custom develop both Nintex Workflow and forms. And once we do that also, we can provide support and training in any capacity that you'd like. A little bit more about me. I'm a senior SharePoint consultant here at Codesigned. I've been focused on SharePoint since 2005, specializing with Nintex applications since 2009. And there's a little bit more about me. You can also see down there's a link to my personal blog as well as my Twitter account. Please feel free to reach out, contact me if you ever have any questions. Definitely stay active on those, and we'll definitely do that. So let's talk about workflow to begin with. The literal definition of workflow is the flow or progress of work done by a company, industry, department, or a person. It's also a sequence of connected steps triggered by an external event or by another activity. It usually involves a movement of data around an organization for the purposes of sign-off, evaluation, performing activities in a process, and co-authoring of information. This slide shows example activities and applications that I've been involved with, that our company has been involved with in building custom applications for using workflow. So this slide is just meant to show some real general examples of what business processes can benefit from workflow. So just for example, onboarding, offboarding, just point out a couple of high points. Onboarding, offboarding, expense requests, help desk, user provisioning, leave requests seems to be a big one. You can also manage projects, do requests for proposals, applications, timesheets, and resource scheduling with workflows. So let's jump right into talking about the actual Nintex Workflow application. The features, the main features of the application are Nintex Workflow features a drag and drop workflow designer. It's tightly integrated within SharePoint. It adds connectivity and advanced workflow features to the Microsoft SharePoint platform also, which allows you to interact with enterprise systems. You can also connect SharePoint to Office 365 and other cloud-based services with the Nintex Live piece. Some of the major features and major advantages of the Nintex Workflow product are that you can actually see the real-time status of your workflows as they progress throughout your process. That's a key feature in that it allows anybody within the organization that's involved with the process to actually go into your site, take a look at the workflow, and see where it has been, where it is currently, and where it could go in the future. So there's a lot of visibility that Nintex Workflow provides within your process. Reusability is also another key feature of Nintex Workflow. You can reuse entire workflows or parts of workflows to suit your needs throughout your organization. Reusability comes in the form of you can save entire workflows or parts of workflows as either templates, modules, or snippets, and we'll talk about those a little bit later in this webinar. You can also extend and customize the application. Another key feature of Nintex Workflow is it allows you to extend and customize your application within Nintex Workflow. Nintex Workflow is also simple to deploy and manage. It's a feature that's installed right on top of your existing SharePoint environment. There's also no client software that's needed. You don't have to install anything else on a user's computer for them to be able to build and edit workflows. And once again, no additional infrastructure costs. It goes right on top of your SharePoint environment, so there's no additional server overhead that's needed to work with Nintex Workflow. Nintex Workflow features more than 100 actions. This slide is just meant to be an example of how many actions there are. We're not going to go over, obviously in the time we have, we're not going to go over every single one of these actions, but I will point out some of the key ones as we go along, especially in the demo. But this slide just gives you an idea of the depth of how many actions there are within the Nintex Workflow product. So also we're going to talk about Nintex Live. Nintex Live is the feature that bridges the Nintex Workflow application with the cloud and with other features that are outside of the organization. So here's some example applications that Nintex Workflow through Nintex Live can interact with. So of course, SharePoint Online and Office 365 are big ones, but there's also services that you can download and install from a catalog into your environment to work with these other features. So these are highlights of some of the more popular ones that are there. Of course, you can interact with social pieces, Twitter, Facebook, Yammer. You can also interact with online storage such as SkyDrive, Box, and Dropbox. You can create WordPress, Twitter, Yammer, and Facebook posts through a workflow. You can also interact with other pieces such as Windows Azure, Amazon Web Services. There are also third-party features that can be added to your workflow, such as the strike iron one that's there. So here's a little bit more about Nintex Live. It connects workflows across hybrid and distributed SharePoint environments, including Office 365. It basically enhances the Nintex Workflow application by adding more tools to the workflow toolbox than come right out of the box. And it does that by offering a catalog of enterprise and consumer cloud service actions that you can easily add from a catalog to your workflows as you're working within them. It also allows secure integration of data outside the firewall with web and mobile enabled forms. So this is just a screenshot of the Nintex Live catalog. I'll show that as part of my demo, but here's a little bit more about what it looks like. The Nintex Live service actually was not originally provided in the Nintex Workflow application. Nintex does a great job of innovating and adding features to their product. So they do a great job continually innovating and adding these features to their product catalog, not just with their updates fixing bugs. Okay, so for everybody's favorite part, enough with the slides. Let's bring on the demo. So from this point on, I'm going to be actually in the product, in the application, and show you as much about it as I can during this webinar. So here's our Nintex Workflow demo site that we're going to use for this webinar. I'm going to go ahead and start out with, let's go to one of the libraries, say the leave request library list that's here. So it's very easy, very quick to create an Nintex workflow. As long as you have the permissions to, all you have to do is click on the list ribbon up here in the ribbon and select the create a Nintex workflow option here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay, first of all, The first screen that pops up allows you to choose either a blank workflow where you can start from scratch and build a workflow, or, like I mentioned before, the reusability of Nintex is a big thing. So you can choose a pre-existing workflow that's either fully configured, could be partially configured, and start that as a basis for your workflow, so you don't have to start from scratch with that. So what I'm going to do now is, let's just say I'm going to take the create a new employee workflow that's already been saved. I can use that as my starting point, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the create button, and once I do that, you'll notice that automatically a set of features is a set of actions is already already dropped on my canvas to be able to create a workflow. So within the designer, so here you have your workflow designer canvas that you can build workflows within. You'll notice that I've got several actions that are here. As I mouse over each one of those, it'll tell me information about those. So each one of these is an individual action that you can work with within the within here. All I have to do to add an action to my workflow is simply go over here to the Workflow Actions menu on the left-hand side and drag and drop an action into these drop points within the workflow. So it's that easy to add actions to the workflow. I can also move things around. So in this case, let's say I actually wanted to have this particular notification go under the approved branch of this approval task. So I'm actually going to drop this, move and drag and drop this over here. So you can see very easily, very quickly that I've got that. I can move actions around within the workflow. So once again, I can take these particular actions, drag them to where I need to, and work with those. There are several features within the actions, several actions that you can perform within the action. So if I click on the drop down for an individual action, I get my menu for this. So here's a configure, copy, disable, and delete. And we'll talk about each one of those as we go along. So the first thing I'm going to do is copy. So let's say in this case I'm actually going to delete this particular action first to give you an example. So let's say the first notification action that I configured is for account creation denied. So let's just say I've got this the wording for this particular email taken care of, but all I need to do really is just change a couple of words in here just to make it different, so I can drop it like in the approved branch. So all I have to do with this is click copy and paste it over here in this action. All I have to do at that point is just go through, change this to approved, and that's simple. That saves a lot of time, especially when you've got very similar actions that you're creating and using, where all you need to do is just change a little bit of information within there. That same action is already fully configured when I copied it over. It's configured exactly like it was before, and that saves a lot of time when you're developing these. Likewise, I can, if there's some of these that I don't need, I can easily delete those. So I'm actually going to copy it, then I can actually delete it. So if I do that, I can delete individual actions, or I can delete all the actions, all the child actions within a within one of these parent actions that are here. So in that case, I'm actually gonna, let's copy this, paste it back in here, and I can actually delete that. So I'm going to do that real quickly. So the next part of the menu for one of the actions is something called disable. What disable allows you to do is basically comment out the action. This comes in very handy when you're doing testing of a workflow, in that I can disable individual actions or multiple actions. So in this case, I'm going to do that. I can also disable actions and a parent action and all its child actions, which I'll do here. So here I've disabled this particular request approval action, and I've disabled it as well as all the child actions related to that. So I'm actually going to go in there and enable those. So all I simply have to do to re-enable those is click on the Enable tab, an Enable option, and here we are. You also notice that there was another option that popped up here called minimize. This comes in very handy as your workflows grow and expand both horizontally or vertically. So if I click on minimize, what it does is it minimizes all the child actions within that one particular parent action. So I'll click on that and you'll see everything is minimized at this point. That comes in handy once again when you're going through workflows, when you're following the path of a workflow or you're working with those, to be able to see, to be able to follow the workflows as they go. So I'm going to go ahead and maximize that. Likewise, once again, I can maximize it as we're going forward with that. So each one of these individual actions can be configured. It has its own configuration piece that you can work with. So let me enable these two right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and configure this account creation accepted notification to go out. So let's click on configure. First thing that pops up, of course, is your configure action and your send notification. Let me actually close this real quickly. You'll notice that some of these actions here have yellow triangles with an exclamation point within them. What that means is the action is not fully configured. There's some required information that's missing from that action, so it needs to be corrected, it needs to be added before it can be used. So if a workflow has one or more actions in it that are not fully configured, you can actually save the workflow, which is, we'll talk about the difference in saving and publishing in just a moment. You can actually save a workflow, but you cannot publish it live to work with. So this makes sure that you don't publish incomplete workflows that aren't fully configured for people to work with. So in other words, if I tried to save this, I'm going to get a pop-up that says, here's my title and description. Once again, we'll talk about this here. So I'm just going to say, call it webinar workflow, and we'll talk about save and publish once again. But if I click the submit button, here you can save it. So I'm actually going to save it here. So if I actually click the publish button here and I've got actions that aren't fully configured, it will not allow me to publish. So once I click on the publish button, I get a message saying these actions need to be configured. The nice thing about this is it actually shows you which individual actions need to be fully configured before you can publish. So in this case, I can't actually publish this workflow until I fix all of these. So I guess the next question is, how do I fix these? So let's go ahead and go into this account creation denied action. So I'm going to click on the drop down for that, and we'll click configure. What this does is it pulls up the configuration screen for this individual action. So there are a couple pieces of information that I'm missing. So you can see here I've got the to and the subject line that are required pieces of information that I need to fill in before I can do that. So let's talk about here how to configure this particular action. So the first thing you've got here is you got to fill in the to information. So in this case, I can fill in information here. This information pulls from a number of sources along in here. If I click on the browse button, what that allows me to do is it allows me to take a look at of the options that I have to actually add to the to button. So in this case, the first section is the internal search. Well, this is my internal environment here that I can take a look at. So in this case, I can just start. I can type in my name. What it will do is it'll pull me up. So here I am, and I can add myself as one of the recipients of this particular email. So that's what I can do. I can pull up information internally. I can also send this particular notification to somebody that's external. So all I have to do is type in somebody's external email address, click add, and it will add it to the to part of the notification. The last last option you have as far as who this can go to is I can look up and add a reference to other information. So the next section is the lookup section. This is information that you can pull from your environment and insert that as a reference into the selection. So in this case, the first section within the lookup piece here is the common section. You can kind of think of this as your information that's related to your environment. So in this case, I can add things like I can insert references to things like the initiator. In this case, that's what I'll do. The person that actually kicked off the workflow or started the process. But I could also put information in there, their manager, other pieces of information here about your environment. Also here, I can add item properties. So the item properties for this particular list are listed in this section here. So in this case, I can actually pick their manager, which is listed here in the item for this, and add them also. So these are the three types of information you can put in there. You can also add workflow variables that are in there, but we'll talk about those in a little while. So all I have to do is click on the OK button, and this is populated. Within the send notification action, you can also specify a CC in the same manner of the two. You can specify who the email address is or who the email notification is from, the importance level, and then next I got to do a subject. So in this case, we're going to say this is a leave request. So we're going to put in leave request submitted, and then what I can do is actually insert a reference to other pieces of data within the subject. And what this does, the workflow will actually insert dynamic information into the workflow as it goes out. So let's click on this. So in this case, I'm going to go to the item property screen, and I believe I've got a request ID. So what I'm going to do is just add the request ID piece here, and so the workflow will dynamically insert that piece of data from the list into my subject. I can also include attachments here in the notification. Now the next section down here, this is the actual body of the email. So when I click on that, you'll notice at the top here in the ribbon that that changes. So what I've got is my whole format text actions that are related to this. So this should look similar to what's within SharePoint. So here I can customize the email, the look and feel of the email, as well as the content that's contained in there. So in this case, I can do things like basic formatting of text. So I can set the font, I can bold, underline, as well as change the color of. I can also add paragraph styling to it, so I could do bullet points, indentions, alignment. There are also stylings, so there's some out-of-the-box ones that you can use. Another handy feature is this includes a spell check, so you can actually go through and check your spelling on your email as you're putting it in there. This is a true HTML email, so I can actually edit the source of that email for some advanced features. So you can add information within there through the edit source, as well as some other markup actions that are within there. On the other tab that's up here, I can also insert other pieces of information here. So I can insert a table, I can insert other media like a picture, insert links or other references to other pieces here too. So in this case, I'm just going to say this is talking about the account creation denied. So we're just doing a little bit different here. So let's go through and just say account denied. So I'm actually going to go up here and put that information here. Let's just make sure that they know what we're talking about. So we're going to bold it. We're going to make it a little bit bigger. Just as an example of that. So I'm going to click Save, and you'll notice in this particular action here that the yellow triangle with the exclamation point went away. That means that this particular action is fully configured and ready to go. So you'll notice when I hover over it, though, it does give me information about it. So what this does, it gives me information about the individual action. So I can do this on any of them, any of my actions that I've got in the Workflow Designer. So in this case, it tells me that this action is going to send a message to myself, to the initiator of the workflow, as well as an item property, which is the manager that's specified here within the action. One of the nice things too here, and this is a good best practice within Nintex Workflow, is that I can actually edit very easily the labels within these individual actions. So what I can do here is all I have to do is click on them to edit them. So in this case, I can edit that. I can tab over to anything else, and I can say 1, 2, 3, ABC. It's a good practice to work with those. So these are the initiator. So it's a good practice here to document your workflows, to put comments within them, so that anybody that's working with them that comes behind you to take a look at the workflows, either to add to them, to edit them, or that's following the workflows, putting comments within here as a best practice helps them to understand exactly what the action does. If I just drop an action here, if I just drop like a send notification action in here, that's all it says. It's just send notification. It didn't really tell you a whole lot about what's going on. In this case, it definitely tells you more about. So I'm going to just go ahead and delete that one. And this comes into play also. So let's go back here. I'm actually going to copy this one and paste it over here. So if we want to add that one to this piece and say count creation, and we're going to say approved. So that's how easy it is to add that. So if so once I've moved this over here, I can actually configure it. If I want to just change the wording to account approved, then there you go. I've got that set up. I had to do very minimal editing and change the meaning of that particular action. So in this case, that's what we can do with that. So let's take a look at some other actions that are available through Nintex Workflow. I'm actually going to add the assign flexi task action right under the send notification we just configured. So you notice that looks a little bit different, of course, than what we just configured. I'm actually going to go through here and choose to configure this particular flexi task here, the assign flexi task action. So you'll notice that right away this looks a little bit more involved than what we were looking at with the send notification as far as the configuration of the action. You will see some similarities, but there's a lot more to it. Once again, I mentioned that each one of these actions can be individually configured. So like the other, assign flexi task actually assigns an individual or group of individuals a task to complete. So many things are wrapped up in this one particular action, and many things happen. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is similar to what we looked at within the send notification. I'm going to pick who this task goes to. So in this case, it's the same setup. So we're going to go through here, and I'm actually going to add it goes to the initiator. So here's the assignee for that. Within this task, I can also choose to allow delegation. So I'm in the action tab right now. So this task description actually is what shows up as part of, it shows up as the actual description and instructions on what to do within the task. So once again, I can customize that just like the messaging that I did in the send notification and add information. With the outcome of this task, by default, the flexi task has two outcomes, but one of the powerful things about this particular task is, and what happens within our business processes is there could be more than two outcomes to this particular task. So in this case, I can actually add one. So let's just say we're going to add the task or add the option of more info needed. Within the actual task form, that will show up as an option, and also there's some comments. So in this case, since there's more info needed, I'm going to require them to enter their information. So I'm going to click OK. So you'll notice there's another outcome. If I save this particular task, you'll notice that the more info needed piece actually shows up now as a third option within here. So one of the nice things about this particular flexi task action is that I can rearrange things as I need to. So if I click move the branch to the left, I can do that. So as the process changes and as I work with it, I can do that. So let's go back in the configuration of that to finish that up. So there's different behaviors that can happen within the flexi task. So you can either set it up so first response applies, majority must choose a specific outcome, all must agree to a specific outcome, majority decides, all must agree. So the different behaviors for this particular task adds a lot of flexibility to what you can do with the task. So like I mentioned, several things happen when the workflow comes to this assign flexi-task action. The first thing is, like I mentioned, the action itself is created within SharePoint. The next thing is that happens is a task email is sent out to the assignees. So the people that I put in here, in this case it's just the initiator, I click on this tab and this is the actual email that they will receive from this particular task. So here's the information about that. This looks somewhat similar to what we saw with the send notification action. So it's who it's going to go to, the from, CC, subject line is also configured exactly the same as the other. But you also notice that now there is some default information that's put in this particular action. So that's configured, that's pre-configured, and is also customizable too. So in this case I've got a link to the actual item, a link to the actual task, as well as a workflow status page where I can see where the workflow is. So that's how that works. I've also got a not required notification, so that's a good example of if this is assigned to a group of people and we've got the behavior of the first response is what we need. Then if it's assigned to 5 people and the first person that completes it, the other 4 no longer have to complete it, this will send them Okay, so we've taken a look at the workflow designer thus far, how you can add actions, how you can move them around, copy, paste, delete, disable the actions, as well as configure them. The next thing I want to take a look at just real quickly is how you can group actions and move them around as a group. So let's just go take a look at the lists and libraries here. We'll start off with that. These are actions that are related to your SharePoint lists and libraries. So just a few high points are related to those. These actions, the examples of these actions that you can use are you can work with the items within the list or library, things like check in and check out items. You can copy items within the site or within another place within SharePoint outside of the site. You can create items via the workflow in this site or in another site. You can create lists or within the environment there. You can also delete one item or multiple items along the way. You can query other lists and pull in information to work within the workflow, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. You can work with document sets as well as update either one item or multiple items at the same time. That definitely comes in handy a lot of the times. You can also set field values, so you can have the workflow update metadata or fields, columns within one item or multiple items along the way there too. So another action that gets used frequently is the set item permissions. This allows you to set or reset item permissions within the workflow. That definitely comes in handy in a lot of different scenarios as you're going along. So we'll talk about some of the integration pieces now. I mentioned some of the advanced features within Nintex Workflow, and this is where these come into play. So here you've got a lot of actions that interact with other pieces of data and pull that into the workflow to allow you to work with it. So first of all, a commonly used one is the call web service. This allows you to any web services that are exposed in your environment. It allows you to, through the workflow, to call those and work within the workflow within the data for that using that web service actions along the way there too. I can work with CRM if I need to. I can actually execute SQL. So this allows me, not just for Microsoft SQL servers, but other data sources. It allows me to either query SQL, perform actions on there, but I can also execute stored procedures on the data and pull the information into the workflow. I can also work with BCS, Excel services. I can query the LDAP. This definitely comes in handy. I can actually query Active Directory type data and work with those within my workflow. Query user profile, that's closely related to query LDAP. I can also query XML and actually update it through the workflow, as well as work with SharePoint search queries. And then and lastly, I can actually work with the web request action to call another service to work with that. Logic and flow. This relates to the how the workflow travels through the different paths of logic that are designed in there. We took a look at the action set, so that's just a grouping of actions. Related to that is a run if. So a run if is the same thing as an action set. However, what it allows you to do is set a condition so that if the condition is met, it does run the actions within the action set, within the run if set. If the condition is not met, then it skips over the entire block, all the actions that are contained within the run if set. A couple things to point out here. I can run parallel actions, which I can have set up parallel branches of the workflow where multiple things are happening at the same time. I can do set a condition, which is a yes no, and routes the workflow accordingly there. I have a switch, which allows me to evaluate a condition and send the workflow down one and only one path in the switch. So I could have multiple branches of a switch, but only go down one particular thing, one particular branch of that workflow. I can also, I've also got logic functions for each and loop, so I can iterate through multiple items based upon conditions or act upon multiple items, looping through those or going through the for each there. And last but not least, the state machine actions, which are definitely used heavily. A lot of times workflows are sequential, meaning they go from point A to point B to point C. They follow a sequential method. Sometimes within our business processes, that's not the case. So a state machine allows you to build logic within a workflow that does not travel down a specified path. So an example of that could be a contract approval process, in that when a contract is submitted, it goes to a paralegal first. The paralegal has the option to approve that contract or send it back to the individual submitter to correct. If the paralegal does approve it, then they can actually approve it and send it to a lawyer. If the paralegal does approve the contract, then that would go to a lawyer. The lawyer then at that point has the same options. They can either approve it, which makes the workflow continue down that specified path, or they could find some information that's incorrect or needs to be fixed, and they could route it back to the paralegal. Paralegal once again has the option to approve or route it back. So you can kind of see an example of how that works. All right, we'll talk about the provisioning piece. Once again, some more advanced functionality that's within the Nintex Workflow product. This allows me to work with different provisioning type actions within the workflow. So some examples of what you can do within the provisioning, with some of the provisioning actions. I can actually create AD users, create AD groups, and add users to those AD groups. I can work with audiences within SharePoint. I can create sites or site collections, or decommission the site collection that's been created. I can decommission AD users or delete AD groups, or also delete audiences, delete sites. I can add AD users, but I can also create those AD user accounts as well as the link or OCS type accounts. And I can also provision users in Exchange. I can remove users from AD group, update their user information within AD or within their user profile that's there. The user interaction pieces. All right, let's talk about those. Within user interaction, these are closely related to tasks that are manual, that involve users to have the workflow progress. So here we've already taken a look at some of these, in that the send notification, this will send out an email, an informational email from the workflow. We looked at the assign flexi task, which allows you to assign a task to one or more users or groups of users with two or more outcomes to it. Closely related to that is the request approval action. It's related to the flexi task in that it only has two outcomes of approve and decline, which is what we see here as part of the default template that we loaded. You can also, there are other actions that you can also assign, other tasks that you can assign to users, such as a to-do task. That's just to complete whether or not something is completed, marked as that. I can also request data from a user, so I can give them a task where they have to fill in one or more pieces of information. The workflow then can consume those and go forward. I can also request review. So if I've got a document and I just want somebody to give me their comments or feedback, I can do that very simply with this action. Also within the user interaction section, you can also interact with, there's some actions that interact with Outlook. So those include creating appointments, creating tasks, and also getting meeting suggestions via the workflow. Okay, so the last set of actions we're going to take a look at are operations. So these are actions that perform functions on the data within the workflow. So some of the high points of the actions that are within here, I've got the build string functionality, in that I can assimilate pieces of information and concatenate those to use within the workflow. I can create dates, create a calculated date, convert values, do math operations. I can pause the workflow for a specified amount of time, or pause a workflow until a specified date or time within there. I can also log information to the workflow history list. This is a huge action that you're going to use frequently within Nintex Workflow. This allows you to write your own messages back to the workflow history list and create your own audit trails for your workflows. I've also got options to work with regular expressions. I can retrieve or store data from the workflow, which comes in handy. Set variables. So we'll talk about variables here shortly, but the workflow, I can have the workflow with this action update or add information to a variable, add data to a variable. I can also start other workflows from within this workflow or terminate other workflows from within here. And last but not least, I can wait for a checkout status to change to have the workflow, so it would basically pause for that. Or I can wait for a certain field or fields within the workflow to update to a certain value and then have the workflow proceed. So at this point, let's take a look, now that we've kind of gone over some of the actions and how to work with them, let's just take a look at the options that are available to us in the ribbon that are up here. Once again, I mentioned that I would come back to save and publish the difference between those two. So that's what I'll talk about now. With saving a workflow, when I click the save button within a workflow, no matter if it's fully configured or partially configured, I can save the workflow as a draft or minor version of the workflow. This is not something that's live and can be acted upon within your environment. The next step within that, of course, is to publish the workflow. Once I publish a workflow and everything's properly configured, this creates a major version of the workflow and really a live version, so to speak. So once I publish the workflow, the environment, the list or library, picks up the workflow and kicks it off based upon whatever conditions that are there. Publishing basically makes the workflow live and ready to use within your environment. From here, I can also open other workflows, but it will close down the one I'm looking with. There's a print option within Nintex Workflow, which definitely comes in handy so that I can actually get a good formatted print, for-print view of the workflow and work with that. Portability is another great feature within Nintex Workflow. So once I've got a workflow either saved or published, I can actually export that workflow and move it between environments. So a lot of times our company, we will develop workflows within our development environment and test those and configure those until we've got it to specification, and we can export the workflow and then import it into our clients' environments, let's say in their development environment. So what the import-export allows you to do is to take the workflow, move it to another environment, fully configured as is, drop it in there, and you can work with it in that environment. That's definitely a great feature within there. The zoom in and zoom out features allow you to view the workflow. So in other words, if I zoom out, I can make the workflow a little bit smaller. This comes in handy if the workflow starts to sprawl horizontally, vertically along the way. I can zoom in once again, as well as make it 100% along the way there too. So let's talk about a couple of things within. I'll come back to the Nintex Live piece. Within the workflow settings piece, there are two options that you have there. So the workflow settings. So let's click on that. These are the settings of that surround the workflow. So I've got a title for the workflow as well as a description. The next section talks about the workflow options, and this is how the workflow is triggered. So you can either start the workflow manually. You can also set it up so that you can start it either when the workflow is created or when it's modified. So in this case, if I wanted the workflow to kick off when an item is created, all I have to do is go through on this drop down and click yes. So when an item is added to this particular list, the workflow automatically kicks off. You notice though, I've got not just a yes/no option here, but I've got something called conditional. So what I can do with a conditional option here within the workflow is when an item is created, I can check for a condition, and if that condition is met, then it will kick off the workflow. If that condition is not met, then the workflow will not start at all. So in this case, for me to configure it, all I got to do is click on the Conditions tab. This will show me the startup conditional startup options for this particular workflow. So in other words, this workflow will start automatically when an item is created and whatever I choose at this point. So I could say that the employee equals, and in this case I'm going to put my information. So let's do that. So I can add myself there. So the way this works is the workflow will only kick off if the item is created and the employee equals myself. So that definitely comes in handy for the workflow doing that. Once again, same thing with modified. I can do either yes or conditional. So when an item is modified, I can actually have the workflow kick off automatically when there's a change or based upon a condition. The rest of this section, the next thing allows you to, if I wanted to, I could actually have an item, or I can have an option within the item drop-down menu to have the to click on to actually start the workflow from there. That definitely comes in handy. So we'll go ahead and save that. That's there. I mentioned it before, and we'll talk about that now, are variables. So one of the key features within a workflow as far as design goes are workflow variables. So here I can manage the workflow variables that are there. So in this case, there already are some workflow variables that are configured. Workflow variables are used within the workflow to store data, and those variables can be used to store data and then be used within the workflow wherever you'd like there. You can also update the workflow variables. There's an action for that we looked at before. So you can, at any point in time, based upon outcomes or based upon the way the workflow travels logically, you can update variables within here. Also, some actions such as the working with web services require you the output from those to be stored in workflow variables. So let's just create a new one just to have. So in this case, I'm just going to create one that says, let's call this new info. It can be these are your options of the type you can use. So in this case, I could do multiple lines of text, but I could also choose choose it to be a choice, a number, date and time, yes, no, person or group, integers. I can also build collection variables where I can store multiple items within there. So in this case, I'll go ahead and click on OK. So we'll click Save. You'll notice that it completed it here at the bottom. We'll close that down. One thing that I haven't mentioned and I meant to mention is the help that's included as part of the Nintex Workflow product. Nintex has done a great job of providing some very comprehensive contextual help that you can reference whenever you need to while you're designing a workflow. So in this case, let's go in here to the Flexi task. I'm going to go ahead and configure it here. So once it comes up, I can click on the help button that's here in the ribbon. So once I do that, it gives me contextual help. So it knows I'm within the configure action for the assigned Flexi task, and it shows me information about that particular task. They've done a great job once again of documenting each one of the configuration options that are within each action. So in this case, it tells me about the Flexi task, what it's used for, where it's located, and then the help proceeds to break down every single option within there and explain how it's used. So in this case, we've got the assignees, option, create individual task, each one of the items, the checkbox, allow delegation, allow lazy approval. All these particular pieces here with all the individual options within the action are broken down and explained. They do a great job of that, so I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. So the next piece to look at as far as the ribbon goes is the Nintex Live catalog. So if I click on that, this will pull up the catalog that's here. So actually, let me go back real quickly. So here are my actions that I've got here currently that I've basically downloaded into my environment to be able to use. I can pull up the Nintex Live catalog here and see all the options that are available to me. So I've got some elevated rights within the site, some administrator type rights, so I can actually take any of these actions I'd like to use and add them to my system to be able to use. So in this case, let's actually go and take a look at a couple of these. So let's say I wanted to add the Bing translation action to my toolbox. So if I clicked on add, of course here it'll say pending. I can add the box download file or upload file features. So all I have to do at that point is if I want to add these, I'll click on OK, and you'll notice here automatically that these individual actions from the Nintex Live catalog are downloaded into my Workflow Designer, and I can use those along the way here too. So let's take a look at some of the other actions that are available in here. So I'm going to put these to 50 so we can see that. Right now there are 113 extra ones that are added here. Majority of these are free that you can use. There are a couple of them that are pay type that you can add, but that's we'll look at some of those as we go along. But here's some of the actions that you can look at. I can filter them by certain categories. So if I wanted to see all the ones that were related to finance, I could do that, which there's only one at this point. Maybe not a good example. So converters and tools. So we'll take a look at those. So you can easily filter those by any one of these categories that you want to. So let's just take a look at some of the actions that are here. If I mouse over each one, it gives me information over here to the right about each individual action before I add it. Once I've added it, I can also remove it likewise, so I could do that if I wanted to. So some of the actions, there are some Bing actions that you can work with. Once again, I mentioned box and Dropbox actions. Actions that interact with Exchange Online, as well as some of the social media pieces like Facebook. There's Google Drive pieces, LinkedIn pieces as well there. These MailChimp actions for the MailChimp email campaign service. These are recent ads. It tells you when they were added. So this was November 12th, 2013. So this is kind of proof of how Nintex is innovating and adding new features to their products as you go along. So we've got MailChimp, a whole slew of Office 365 actions that you can work with through your workflow. Go to the next page and take a look at some of those. So more Office 365, Rackspace pieces, SharePoint Online, a whole set of those. And then finally some pieces on with some actions with SkyDrive. Some of these strike iron actions are a trial, so you could actually add those, do a trial within there, and then purchase those if you'd like. In the future, the roadmap for Nintex is to add more and more of these features, both free, and then companies will probably add some of these along the way that you can purchase to work with. And then some more Twitter pieces, and then finally, working with WordPress as a Wonderground weather piece, as well as working with Yammer. So once again, the Nintex Live catalog allows you to add functionality, add features to your environment, and expand your toolbox for your Workflow Designer. So before I wrap up and move into an actual demo of a pretty straightforward process, I wanted to talk, and I promised I would come back to the difference between templates and snippets. So let's take a look at those. So let's talk about templates first. If you remember when we first opened the Workflow Designer, we were prompted for the option to either start with a blank Workflow Designer workflow, or we could actually take one of the templates and use that. You'll notice up here, if I click on the drop down for the Save button, this allows me to save the workflow. In this case, the workflow as a whole, either as a workflow, as a snippet, or as a template. So this is how I would take the workflow, save it as a template in one of those categories that we saw at the very beginning. I could also save this workflow as a snippet. We'll talk about snippets here in just one second. Saving the workflow as a snippet saves it to the My Snippets option down here in the Workflow Actions menu, and allows me to drop that whole piece, that whole snippet, into the workflow and configure it as is and work with it. So in this case, I've already got another snippet that I've actually saved, which just is a test action. So snippet just acts as another action within your workflow designer here. So in this case, I'm actually going to take it. Let's drop it at the very beginning of the workflow. So you'll notice that I've got an action set that's here. This is a test action set. If I maximize it, then I've got a couple actions that are already configured. So it's that simple to take a snippet and drop it into a workflow already pre-configured. This comes in handy if you've got a lot of repeatable set of actions that you don't have to remember how to configure those within your environment to use frequently. So to save, I mentioned you could save the entire workflow as a snippet or as a template, but if let's just say I wanted to save one particular set of actions within the workflow, not the whole workflow, but just a set of actions as a snippet, I can do that also. So in this case, I can also actually save this action set as a snippet. So if I do that, I'm going to click Save as a Snippet. It gives me the option of what to name it. So let's just call this our webinar action set. So if I do that and click Submit, you'll notice here as soon as it's saved, it's automatically saved as an option here within Workflow Actions. I can take that I just did and drop it into the workflow, fully configured as is, and work with that there. Now one caveat to my snippets is that when you save something as a snippet, only you can see that individual snippet. So a fellow employee, a fellow coworker can't see the snippets that I've saved out there. If you had to, if you needed them to see this part of it, the best way to do that would be either save the entire workflow as a template, or you could actually export the workflow and send it over to them. One thing I forgot to mention as far as importing and exporting goes, when you do export a workflow, the exported workflows are saved as a .nwf file. Those files are usually small in footprint and are easily maintained, easily stored either on a hard drive in some kind of storage, or you could easily email those back and forth along the way. So at this point, what I'd like to do is just show a real straightforward, real simple demo, basically submitting an item, having the workflow kick off and kind of track the workflow as we go along. So I'm actually going to close this here. It's going to ask me, do I want to save it? Let's go ahead and leave the page and we'll go back to my site here. So I've got a leave request. So what we're going to do now is go through the leave request. I'm going to open a couple of tabs here so that we can follow things as we go along. The home page for this site, let me mention about some of the web parts that do come out of the box within Nintex Workflow as this opens up. So you'll notice here I've got a couple of web parts that are on the home page that are here. They're the My Workflow Task web part as well as the Workflows I've Started web part. These come out of the box with Nintex Workflow and provide a lot of great functionality. So the My Workflow Task web part shows me the current task that I've got assigned to me through the workflow, and it shows information about each one of those tasks. So in this case, it shows the item that the workflow is related to, which workflow it is, a status, a waiting sense, as well as the current action that goes along here. So all I have to do to either get information about the workflow or actually complete the task is just click on one of these links. So if I clicked on the actual item name, and this is actually configurable through the web part, this will take me to the actual task form, the workflow task form that I've got to complete. If I go back to this screen and I click on the current action, what this will do is it will take me to the workflow progress screen where I can see that, but more on that here in just a moment. The workflows I've started web part vary slightly from this in that it shows me the workflows that I've kicked off and where they are in the process. So I may not have a task within this workflow, but this allows me to see where the workflow is in the process, so that I can get a real quick view of what it looks like. So once again, I can click on the different pieces of items, different pieces within here to get a view of where it is. So in this case, it tells me the item that I've kicked off, what I've worked on, what workflow is, and where it is in the process. In this case, this one's been idle for 174 days, and so I'm waiting on somebody to approve this or review it, and they've been waiting a long time for that. So that's just to show the different web parts that come with it. So okay, so now I'm going to actually submit. We're going to walk through an actual submission of an item and the workflow that kicks off. So in this case, this is just a simple leave request where I go to a form to fill out. Once I submit my leave request, it actually kicks off a workflow, and we'll follow that through the process, both through the web parts and actually through the list here, just to show some information there. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and submit a new leave request. So when I do that, I've got a form that's set up here. And in this case, I know I'm going to be on vacation. I'm going to type in my information. This form could actually be configured too to pull in this information automatically, but for this case, for this piece, I'm going to actually have myself as employee and manager, so you can see all the different emails and things that I get throughout it. So let's just go ahead and do a start date. So in this case, we're going to do, I'm going to be off for a long 4th of July weekend, so we'll do that for 7th. So I'm going to be off for 24 hours. Of course, we're going to have some fireworks here. So I'm going to submit the request. So what will happen here in just a moment is once I submit the request, it will kick off the workflow automatically. So in this case, I'm going to click Submit Request. And once again, I didn't fill this out correctly, so let's do that real quickly. Get some good validation there. And I have to refresh, and the workflow now will show a couple things will happen now that I've submitted the request. The leave request workflow shows is in progress, so it actually kicked off the workflow. The first couple of steps as far as the processing goes is that the workflow is going to update the request ID here as well as the request status. So by now, if I refresh it here, well, it should take a moment here. And there's my alert. So in this case, it updated the request ID and the request status here too. I've gotten some emails now, and that's the alert that I've gotten from the email. If I go here and take a look at some of my emails that are here. So in this case, let's go out here. So I've got 2 emails. Because I'm serving dual roles within this workflow, I get all the emails that are here. So the first thing is, me as the submitter, I get an email that says I've submitted the request, and here's the information. It's being reviewed by your manager that's here. And I've got a link to the actual item that's there. The next piece here, of course, is myself. I put myself as a manager, so I'm getting the task here. So this is an email alerting me that I've received a task, that I've submitted, this employee has submitted a request, and it's up to me to review and approve it going along the way there too. So let's go back over here. So a couple ways to track how this workflow is progressing. So if I go back to my home page now and I take a look at the different web parts that are there, you'll notice after I refresh the page that I now see, this is Eric Rhodes -10. I now see that I've got a task because I put myself as a manager for that particular workflow. I also see down here is, okay, I can see that I've kicked this off, and I'm taking a look at where it is within the workflow, which is the leave request approval from the manager. So I'm at this particular action that's here. For me to track this workflow and what's going on with it, all I have to do is click on the drop down for this particular item and look at the workflow history. So in this case, what I'm going to do here is actually open this in their tab. So when I click on that particular link, it shows me the workflow. This gives me the workflow progress screen. So what this shows is a graphical representation of the workflow. It shows you where the workflow has been, which is marked in green, where it currently is, or what's pending, which is in yellow, and gray is where the workflow either has not traveled or where it could travel as it goes along. So in this case, I've gotten all this information, all this processing done as part of the workflow. This has all been completed. All I have to do to mouse over any of these actions. So in this case, the request submitted notification, if I mouse over that, it gives me information about that particular item. So you can see the entry time and who the message was sent to. If I scroll down just a little bit, I can now see that this workflow is in progress, and the current stage or current step that this workflow is in is the leave request approval, which is what we saw in the web part previously. So all I have to do in this case is just mouse over that, and I can see that on 4:23 at this particular entry time, this action happened, and it shows that it's a pending action. It's waiting on the manager, in this case myself, to approve it. So I can see where it is within the workflow. All the rest of these actions that are here also have yet to happen. So based upon what I select as a manager, I can follow the workflow as it goes. So what I'm going to do now is, since I'm the manager, and I can also, we'll actually talk about Nintex Mobile here in just a moment, I can see that I've gotten these tasks that are there. All I have to do, since I see this as my task, I can go back to the home page here and click on the item that I've got assigned to me, and so here's my task that I've got to do. So here's some instructions that I put as far as the workflow goes up here. So the outcome, I can either approve and decline it. So I'm going to be nice. I definitely could use that time off, so I'm going to say have fun as part of my comments, and just click OK, and that will approve the workflow. So some more things are going to happen here in just a moment once I approve that. So in this case, if I go through, you'll notice first of all that after I approve that, it dropped out of my workflow task web part. So I'm no longer have this as a task. So once I've completed, it drops off there. If I refresh the page here, also it's probably going to drop off of here because that's the end of the workflow. And there's my email alert coming through as we speak. So once again, it dropped off of the workflows I've started because it's been completed. If I go back to the workflow progress screen and I click on refresh that, you'll notice that once again this has changed. So the leave request approval is marked as approved, so it goes down the approved branch. A couple more things happen here in that request approved notification is sent back to the employee, and this item is an item is added to the leave request calendar for this particular request, and then I'm interacting with another system here too to update the hours for the workflow. So if I go back to the actual leave request list and I select, refresh that, you can see here that the request status has changed to approved and the workflow is marked as completed. Going back to my email, myself as the submitter, I actually did get an email that said your leave request has been approved by your manager with these comments of have fun, which I definitely hope to do. And then here's some other information about the actual request that's here. So that's just a straightforward, that's a simple example of the of a process, but it kind of gives you an idea of how you can build a workflow and track the process of the workflow there. So the last piece I wanted to mention, and you probably saw it pop up here on my screen, has to do with the Nintex mobile app. This is another example of how Nintex is constantly innovating their products. They've added a couple of mobile apps that you can use to either fill in forms or work with your task in a mobile way. In this case, we're going to take a look at the mobile app. I've got a Windows 8 machines, so they have a mobile app for that. So and I'm going to go right to that and take a look at the leave request piece that's here. So if I click on this leave request piece, this is the Nintex mobile app for Windows 8. So what that does is it shows me all the applications, all the tasks that are assigned to me in a very nice, neat mobile page, so I can see those and respond to those accordingly. So much like what you saw with the web part, this shows me all the tasks that are currently assigned to me throughout my organization in this case. So all I have to do is click on one of them. So let's click on that. It looks a little bit different than what you see in the browser, but it allows you to work with those. This mobile app also allows you to work offline with this. So if I wasn't connected to the internet and I still had this mobile app that's there, and this app within here, or with a task within the mobile app, I can work with that. So I can go back to my task. One of the nice things about this, let's go ahead, I can click on that and refresh it. So I can see all the things that are assigned to me. You can see one of those dropped off my queue, which is nice. But I can also sort these also. So I can sort this by either workflow name, task name, created date, or due date. So let's just sort it by workflow name. And here I can see all the different tasks that I've got assigned to me based upon the different workflows. So I've got one that's a request approval for manager approval for a conference request approval workflow, some help desk things, some help desk tasks, as well as a leave request task I need to approve. So I can resort those by created date. Once again, look at that. Also within here, the forms that I fill out, and this is a little bit different than what we're talking about, but any forms that I've got in my environment I can click on and fill those out through the Nintex mobile app. I can also fill those out offline and save them as drafts and work with those. The mobile app also allows you to work with different devices, both phones and tablets. So you can also download a similar app for either your iPhone or and Windows Phone at this point. Android is coming right now. As of this webinar, they're working on an Android app that's coming out. But you can, and these are free applications, part of their innovation that you can work with. So in this case, I can actually, from my iPhone, I can actually see these same types of the same type of similar setup to this, and then I can see all my tasks and I can approve those from my mobile device, whether that be a phone or a tablet. So I wanted to go back just to wrap up showing you the Nintex Workflow product here. So once again, back to the home page, I've got the different web parts that are here to work with. Okay, so I'm starting that last little bit over. So I just showed you a lot of the features of the Nintex Workflow product. I showed you a simple example of a workflow, a request, vacation request type workflow, but you can definitely see a lot of the possibilities. You can build very complex and very sophisticated workflows with this product in a short amount of time. So let's wrap up the webinar here. We saw the Nintex Workflow application. I showed you how to work within the workflow designer, showed you how to really quickly, very easily create a workflow, add actions, move those around, copy them, paste them, delete them, work within there, as well as reviewing several of the workflow actions that are available. We looked at the Nintex Live feature. We talked about the differences between some of the reusability that's available within Nintex Workflow, and talked about the workflow web parts, and then finally the mobile apps, and going through a real straightforward example for there. Thank you for your time. Thank you for attending this webinar. As a last step here, I wanted to put up some information once again about our company. So thank you once again for attending this Nintex Workflow webinar by Codesigned. To find out more about Codesigned and about Nintex Workflow, please follow any one of these links that's here on the on this particular slide, You can find out more about our company at our website and take a look at some of our featured work. Also, feel free to take a look at our blog. We post a lot of information related to Nintex Workflow and SharePoint within our company blog. Also, we're very active on the different social media channels, so take a look at us there. Please feel free to follow up with us here at Codesigned to find out more about Nintex Workflow and the other Nintex products that are available. We look forward to speaking with you and to working with you. Thanks again.